Rasputin for sleep, the mad monk of Russia. Close your eyes, take a slow, deep breath. Let the world around you grow quiet. Feel the day slipping away. Feel your body becoming heavy and warm. Tonight, we travel back in time, a little more than 100 years into the past, to the cold, vast empire of Russia in its final years, to the snow-covered streets of St. Petersburg, where horse-drawn sleighs pass quietly under the gas lamps, to the marble corridors of the Winter Palace, where the last Tsar and his family live in golden isolation from the unrest growing outside their gates. And tonight, we will follow the story of one of the strangest figures in all of history. A man who came out of the deep Siberian forest, walked into the heart of the Russian Empire, and helped bring it crashing down. A peasant, a wanderer, a self-proclaimed holy man. His name was Grigori Rasputin. He was called the Mad Monk, the Healer, the Devil, the Holy Devil. Different people, different names. He was loved and hated with equal intensity. He was murdered 4 times in one night and, according to legend, refused to die. This is his story. Let yourself drift slowly into that world now. Let the modern world fade. Let the noise of the day grow distant. Imagine the cold air of a Russian winter, the smell of wood smoke and incense, the slow tolling of a church bell across the frozen Never River, the candles flickering in front of dark icons in a quiet Orthodox chapel. We have all night. There is no hurry. Part 1, the Siberian beginning. The story begins in a small village called Pokrovskoye, in the deep forests of western Siberia. This is a remote place, cold and wild. The villages here are made of dark wooden houses with steep roofs to shed the snow. Smoke rises from chimneys into a sky that is gray and heavy for most of the year. In summer, the days are long and bright, and wildflowers cover the fields. In winter, the temperature falls to -30, -40, and the rivers freeze solid for months. In this village, in the year 1869, a child was born to a poor peasant family. His name was Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin. His father was a coachman and farmer, hard-working and ordinary. His mother was simple, devout, and overworked. The young Grigori grew up like any other peasant child of his time. He worked in the fields. He tended the family horses. He went to the village church on Sundays and listened to the long Orthodox liturgies. He was not particularly devout as a boy. He was wild and got into trouble. He drank. He fought. He stole. Some who knew him in those early years said he was a difficult child, restless and strange, who saw things others did not see. Then something happened. We do not fully know what. According to some accounts, Rasputin had a vision in the fields one day. He saw the Virgin Mary, or perhaps a saint, who spoke to him and changed his life. According to other accounts, he simply fell in with a group of religious wanderers who passed through his village and was drawn to their way of life. Whatever it was, around the year 1892, when he was 23 years old, Grigori Rasputin left his wife and children in Pokrovskoye and became a wanderer. In Russia at that time, there was an old tradition of religious pilgrims who walked from monastery to monastery, holy place to holy place, sometimes for years. They were called straniki, wanderers, holy beggars. They carried nothing but a wooden staff and a bag of bread. They slept in barns or in the forest. They prayed constantly. They were often considered touched by God. For more than 10 years, Rasputin lived this life. He walked across Russia. He visited monasteries in the north, in the south, in the deep forests of the east. He went on long pilgrimages to Greece, to Mount Athos, where the great Orthodox monasteries stood on a peninsula reaching out into the blue Aegean Sea. He went to Jerusalem and walked the streets where Christ had walked. By the time he returned to his home village, Around 1903, Rasputin was a changed man. He had let his hair and beard grow long. His eyes had become piercing. Many who met him remarked on his strange, intense eyes that seemed to look directly into your soul. He had developed a powerful personal charisma. He could quote scripture endlessly. He spoke in long, mystical sentences that seemed to mean something deeper than they said. And he had developed a reputation as a healer. People came to him with their problems, sicknesses of the body, troubles of the mind, marital problems, financial worries. Rasputin would pray with them. He would lay his hands on them. And sometimes, mysteriously, they would say they felt better. They would say something had changed. His reputation began to spread. From his small village in Siberia, word traveled. There is a holy man in Pokrovskoy, people said. A starets, an elder, a spiritual master. He has the power of God in his hands. The word reached St. Petersburg. Part 2, the capital. St. Petersburg, in the early 1900s, was one of the great cities of the world. It had been built 200 years earlier by Peter the Great, on the marshy banks of the Never River, as a window onto the west. It was a city of palaces and canals, of broad boulevards lined with Italian-style buildings painted in pastel colors, pale yellow, soft pink, gentle green, of grand churches with golden domes that glittered in the long summer evenings, and gas lamps that flickered all night in the long winter darkness. This was the heart of the Russian Empire. The Tsar lived here, in the Winter Palace on the bank of the river. The great noble families had their townhouses here. The wealthy merchants, the military commanders, the professors and writers and artists who shaped Russian high culture. But St. Petersburg in those years was also a city in spiritual crisis. The educated elite had largely turned away from traditional Russian orthodoxy. Many were searching for something new, something deeper, more mystical, more meaningful. Spiritualism was popular. Seances were held in noble drawing rooms where wealthy ladies tried to contact the dead. Eastern mysticism was fashionable. Madame Blavatsky and her Theosophical Society had many followers among the aristocracy. Strange holy men, charismatic monks, self-proclaimed prophets, these were welcomed into the highest circles of society. Into this strange spiritual atmosphere, in late 1903, Grigori Rasputin arrived from Siberia. He came as a humble pilgrim in worn peasant clothes, with no money and no introduction. But within a few years, through the religious salons of the city, through influential clergymen who took an interest in him, through wealthy patronesses who became his devoted followers, Rasputin worked his way upward. He met bishops, he met countesses, he met grand duchesses. And eventually, in November 1905, he was presented to the Tsar. Tsar Nicholas II was a quiet, gentle man. He had ascended to the throne in 1894 at the age of 26, with very little preparation. He loved his family. He loved Russia. He prayed constantly. He believed deeply that he ruled by the grace of God and was personally responsible for the souls of his subjects. He was also, by most accounts, not a strong ruler. He was indecisive. He was easily influenced by the last person who had spoken to him. He distrusted his ministers. He clung to outdated ideas of autocratic rule when most of Europe had moved on to constitutional monarchy. His wife was the Empress Alexandra. She was a German princess by birth, granddaughter of Queen Victoria. She had converted to Russian Orthodoxy when she married Nicholas, and she had thrown herself into the new faith with all the intensity of a convert. She prayed constantly. She fasted. She believed in visions and miracles. She believed that the Russian peasants, simple, devout, suffering people, were the true Russia, and that aristocrats and politicians had grown corrupt and faithless. She and Nicholas had 4 daughters, beautiful girls named Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. They lived in golden seclusion in the palace at Tsarskoye Selo, just outside St. Petersburg. The girls were taught at home. They had few friends outside the family. They wore simple white dresses and spent their days reading, drawing, playing with their dogs, and writing letters to relatives. And then finally, in 1904, the long-awaited heir was born. A son. They named him Alexei. But almost immediately, the family discovered a terrible secret. The baby Alexei had hemophilia. Hemophilia is a hereditary disease in which the blood does not clot properly. Any cut, any bruise, any small injury can cause uncontrollable bleeding. In a child like Alexei, even a simple fall could be life-threatening. A bumped knee could cause internal bleeding that lasted for days, with terrible pain, fever, and the possibility of death. The disease had run through the royal families of Europe. It had come into the Russian imperial family through Queen Victoria, Alexandra's grandmother, who was a carrier. Several of Alexandra's male cousins had died from it as children. The family kept the boy's condition a complete secret from the Russian people. It was hidden even from most of the court. Only a small circle of doctors and close family knew that the heir to the throne was constantly on the edge of death. The medical treatments of the time could do almost nothing for hemophilia. There were no transfusions, no clotting medications. Doctors could only give the child morphine for the pain and wait. Sometimes the bleeding stopped on its own. Sometimes it did not. The Empress Alexandra suffered terribly with her son. Every illness of Alexei felt like a knife in her heart. She would sit by his bedside for days without sleeping. She would pray with the icon corner candles lit until dawn. She would beg God for a miracle. It was in this state of constant anxiety and desperate faith that she first met Rasputin. Part 3, The Healer. Their first real meeting in any depth came in 1907. The young heir Alexei, only 3 years old, had suffered a terrible attack of internal bleeding after a fall. He was crying with pain. The bleeding could not be stopped. The doctors gave him morphine but could do nothing more. The family was preparing for the worst. In desperation, the Empress called for Rasputin. The peasant from Siberia entered the sick room. He looked at the suffering child. He sat down beside the bed. He took the small hand in his rough peasant hands. He began to pray softly in his strange, mystical way, speaking words half in Russian and half in something that did not seem to be any language at all. According to the family, the bleeding stopped. The fever broke. The child grew calmer, fell asleep, and the next morning was visibly better. The Empress was transformed. From that moment in her heart, Rasputin was the man God had sent to save her son. He was not just a healer. He was the protector of the heir, the protector of the dynasty, the man whose presence in the world meant that her child might live to become Tsar. Did Rasputin really have healing powers? Historians still debate this question more than 100 years later. Some theories suggest a kind of psychological effect, that his calm presence, his deep voice, his confident touch reduced the stress in Alexei's body, which in turn reduced his blood pressure and slowed the bleeding. Others have noted that Rasputin discouraged the doctors from giving Alexei aspirin, which was widely prescribed at the time for pain, and which we now know thins the blood and makes bleeding worse. Simply by stopping the wrong medication, Rasputin may have helped the child recover. Others have suggested simple coincidence. Many of Alexei's bleeding episodes did improve on their own, and Rasputin happened to be present at the right moments. The Empress, in her desperate emotional state, attributed every recovery to his intervention. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. Alexandra became utterly devoted to Rasputin. She believed his prayers kept her son alive. She believed his spiritual wisdom was the answer to Russia's troubles. She trusted him absolutely. And through her, Rasputin gained access to the inner heart of the Russian Empire. The Tsar Nicholas was more cautious. He liked Rasputin personally. He found his peasant simplicity refreshing. He believed Rasputin to be a true Russian holy man, a starets in the old tradition. But he was also aware from the beginning that other people had concerns about the strange man from Siberia. And other people had many concerns indeed. Part 4. The Scandal. From the moment Rasputin became close to the imperial family, scandalous rumors began to spread about him. Some of the rumors were almost certainly true. Some were exaggerated. Some were probably invented by his enemies. It is difficult, even today, to separate the man from the myth. Rasputin drank heavily. This was no secret. He went to restaurants and taverns, often with rich admirers, and drank vodka and Madeira wine in large quantities. Sometimes he became extremely drunk. Sometimes he danced wildly on tables. Sometimes he made loud, boastful speeches about his relationship with the Tsar and Tsarina. He spent time with women. He had many female admirers, particularly wealthy, aristocratic women who came to him for spiritual guidance. He was rumored to have had affairs with many of them. He was rumored to have organized strange religious gatherings where ordinary moral rules did not apply. His teaching, as far as we can tell, included a strange element. He seemed to preach that one had to fall before one could rise. That one had to truly experience sin before one could truly experience repentance and grace. This was a kind of mystical idea that had appeared before in Russian religious sects, particularly a sect called the Kh-listy, which had been condemned by the Orthodox Church for its strange practices. Rasputin's enemies accused him of being a member of this forbidden sect. He denied it. The truth is unclear. What is clear is that the police kept a close watch on him. Reports were filed. Restaurant brawls were documented. Women complained about his improper conduct. Bills came in from luxurious establishments. The rumors made their way to newspapers, and eventually some of them were printed. The image of Rasputin that began to circulate in Russian society was a disturbing one. A dirty peasant with greasy hair and unwashed clothes, who somehow had gained complete influence over the imperial family. A drunkard who spoke to the Tsar of Russia like an equal. A man who whispered things into the Tsarina's ear. A man who, the rumors said, was sleeping with half the aristocracy. Most of these rumors were grossly exaggerated. Rasputin's actual conduct, while certainly improper for someone close to the imperial family, was not the wild, orgiastic monstrosity that his enemies painted. But it did not matter. The image stuck, and the Tsarina would hear none of it. When ministers warned her about Rasputin, she dismissed them. When the Tsar's own mother begged him to send Rasputin away from St. Petersburg, the Tsarina was furious. When members of the imperial family, grand dukes and duchesses, held meetings to discuss the danger of Rasputin's influence, the Tsarina viewed them as traitors. She believed with absolute certainty that Rasputin was a holy man sent by God. She believed that anyone who criticized him was either a tool of dark forces or simply jealous of the access to power he had gained. And the more the family was warned, the more they clung to him. Part 5, The Great War. In 1914, the First World War began. Russia entered the war on the side of France and Britain against Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Russian army was huge, millions of men, but it was poorly equipped, poorly led, and not ready for modern industrial warfare. The war was a disaster for Russia from the beginning. In the first weeks, an entire Russian army was destroyed at the Battle of Tannenberg in East Prussia. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. The Russian commander shot himself rather than survive the defeat. More disasters followed. The army retreated. The wounded poured back from the front in endless trains. Hospitals overflowed. Food shortages began in the cities. Prices rose. Workers grew angry. And as the war went badly, the Tsar made a fateful decision. In September 1915, he left St. Petersburg and went to the front to take personal command of the Russian army. He believed it was his sacred duty to lead his soldiers personally. It was a catastrophic mistake. with the Tsar away at military headquarters, hundreds of kilometers from the capital. The actual government of Russia fell, in practice, into the hands of the Tsarina Alexandra. And the Tsarina, of course, was guided by Rasputin. For the next year and a half, Rasputin's influence over Russian affairs reached its peak. He was consulted about ministerial appointments. He recommended which generals should be promoted and which should be dismissed. He was given access to government documents. He met regularly with ministers, though many of them despised him and only met with him because the Tsarina insisted. The result was chaos. Ministers came and went in rapid succession. Many were chosen for their personal loyalty to Rasputin rather than their competence. Talented officials were dismissed. Reform was abandoned. Corruption flourished. The war effort suffered. And meanwhile, the Russian people were suffering terribly. Food shortages had become severe. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Soldiers at the front had no boots, no ammunition, no medical care. The wounded came home with stories of incompetence and waste. Russia was beginning to come apart. And in the heart of the imperial system, helping to make all of it worse, was the strange Siberian peasant who refused to leave the palace. Members of the imperial family began to discuss, openly, what could be done about Rasputin. Some of them concluded that the only solution was to kill him. Part 6. The Murder. The conspiracy against Rasputin came together in late 1916. The leading figure was Prince Felix Yusupov. The Yusupovs were one of the wealthiest families in Russia, wealthier even than the Romanovs in some ways. Prince Felix was 29 years old, handsome, sophisticated, and intelligent. He was married to the Tsar's niece, which gave him access to the imperial family. He was also, by his own later account, deeply ashamed of Russia's situation and determined to save the country by removing what he saw as the source of its corruption, Rasputin. Yusupov was joined by Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a cousin of the Tsar, by Vladimir Purishkevich, a right-wing politician known for his fiery speeches against Rasputin, and by two other minor conspirators. They settled on a plan. Yusupov invited Rasputin to his palace in St. Petersburg late at night on December 29, 1916. He told Rasputin that he wanted him to meet his beautiful young wife, knowing that Rasputin would not refuse such an invitation. Yusupov's wife was actually not in the city. The whole story was a trap. Rasputin arrived around midnight, dressed in his usual rough peasant clothes, accompanied by Yusupov. They went down to a basement room in the palace, which had been specially prepared. The room was decorated with antique furniture and Persian carpets. A small fire burned in the grate. On a table sat cakes and bottles of Madeira wine. The cakes and the wine had been laced with enough cyanide to kill several men. Yusupov, hands trembling, served Rasputin the poisoned food. Rasputin ate the cakes. He drank the wine. He chatted casually about religion and politics. Nothing happened. Yusupov watched in horror. 2 hours passed. Rasputin was still alive. He showed no symptoms of poisoning. He was still talking, still drinking, still enjoying himself. Yusupov began to panic. He excused himself, ran upstairs to where the other conspirators were waiting, and told them that the poison was not working. They debated what to do. Then Yusupov took a revolver, went back downstairs, and shot Rasputin in the back as the holy man examined a crystal cross. Rasputin fell to the floor, apparently dead. The conspirators gathered around the body. They were certain it was over. But after some minutes, Rasputin's body twitched. He opened his eyes. He let out a terrible cry. He grabbed at Yusupov, struggled to his feet, and tried to flee. He stumbled up the stairs, out into the snowy courtyard, screaming and bleeding from the gunshot wound. Purishkevich pursued him with a pistol. 2 more shots rang out. Rasputin fell again in the snow. The conspirators, terrified now, beat him with a heavy weight. They bound his hands and feet. They wrapped him in a blue curtain, and they drove him to the frozen Neva River, where they pushed his body through a hole in the ice. When the body was recovered 3 days later, the autopsy showed something extraordinary. There was water in Rasputin's lungs. He had still been alive when they put him in the river. He had drowned. The poison had not killed him. The bullets had not killed him. The beatings had not killed him. He had finally died of drowning under the ice of the Neva. The news spread quickly. The truth, with all the strange details, leaked out within days. The murder of Rasputin became one of the most famous and bizarre political assassinations in modern history. Part 7, The Fall. Rasputin was dead, but it did not save Russia. It was too late. The Tsarina was shattered by Rasputin's death. She had her holy man buried in a private chapel near the palace. She continued to consult his prophecies, for he had left behind many letters and predictions, including one in which he warned that if he was killed by members of the imperial family, the family itself would not survive the year. That prophecy, true or false, was about to come true. In March 1917, only weeks after Rasputin's death, revolution broke out in St. Petersburg. The food shortages had become unbearable. The workers went on strike. The soldiers refused to fire on the crowds. The streets filled with red flags. Within days, the entire Russian government collapsed. The Tsar was forced to abdicate. The Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for 300 years, was finished. The family was placed under arrest. They were moved from palace to palace, then sent into exile in Siberia, in the very region where Rasputin had been born. They lived under increasingly harsh conditions. Their guards became more hostile. They were eventually moved again to a town called Yekaterinburg in the Urals. In July 1918, in a basement room in Yekaterinburg, the entire family was executed by Bolshevik guards. The Tsar, the Tsarina, the 4 daughters, the young Alexei, the boy whose illness had brought Rasputin to power. All of them shot down in the night, in a small room in a small Russian city, far from the palaces of St. Petersburg. Their bodies were burned, buried, and lost for decades. They would not be found until the 1970 and finally identified by DNA testing in the 1990s. The dynasty was over. The empire was over. A new and terrible chapter of Russian history was beginning, one of revolution, civil war, famine, terror, and decades of communist rule. And in the background of all of it, like a strange shadow, stood the figure of Grigori Rasputin. The peasant from Siberia who had come out of the forest walked into the heart of the empire, and somehow, through means we still do not fully understand, helped bring it all crashing down. closing a world at rest. Let the story settle around you now. The world of Imperial Russia grows quiet. Imagine the streets of St. Petersburg at night more than 100 years ago. Snow is falling slowly in large, soft flakes. The gas lamps along the canals glow yellow in the darkness. A horse-drawn sleigh passes silently, its bells muffled by the snow. In an upstairs window, a single candle still burns. In a small chapel on the grounds of a palace just outside the city, a quiet grave lies under fresh snow. The wooden cross above it is simple. A few flowers, frozen now, lie on the stone. This is where they buried him, Grigori Rasputin, the mad monk, the holy man, the strange peasant from the deep forest. His story, finished now, lies under the snow with him. In the imperial palace at Tsarskoye Selo, the lights are dim. The empress is asleep, exhausted by grief. The 4 young grand duchesses are asleep in their narrow beds, dreaming of summers that will never come. The young Alexei is asleep too, his small body finally at rest, for tonight at least. The Tsar is far away, at military headquarters, asleep at his desk, his hand still on a letter to his wife that he was writing when he drifted off. The fire in his stove has burned low. Outside his window, snow falls on the dark Russian land. Across the empire, 11 time zones wide, the great quiet of a Russian night settles over everything. In Siberian villages, the wooden houses are dark and silent under deep drifts of snow. In Moscow, the bells of the Kremlin churches have rung the midnight hour. In far Vladivostok, the morning is just beginning, the sun rising over the sea. This whole vast world, soon to be swept away by revolution, sleeps under the same cold winter stars. The stars that watched over Pokrovskoye when a peasant boy named Grigori was born. The stars that watched over the Winter Palace when the Empress paced beside her sick child. The stars that watched over the frozen, never river the night. They pushed a strange, holy man through a hole in the ice. Ancient and unchanging, the world of Imperial Russia fades slowly, like a dream at the edge of sleep. The palaces grow dark, the chapels are silent, the bells are still. The snow falls quietly on streets that will soon be filled with red flags and gunfire, but tonight, in our story, are only quiet and white. Everything is at peace. Everything is at rest. Let yourself drift now, through the soft darkness, following the current of the long Russian night. Rest now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well.